What's up, people? Time for another movie review, and this week we've got Man of Steel. Saw it Saturday, day after it came out, day after it came out, and I usually don't do that, but I was excited for this one, and I wanted to catch it before I learned anything, revealing about it, so I decided I'm going to go second day, and after thinking about it for 2 days, here are my thoughts. Now, Man of Steel is, of course, a much hyped Superman reboot starring Henry Cavill and Amy Adams, and it features the directorial and producer work of Zack Snyder and Christopher Nolan, respectively. So you have some very impressive things coming together with those two different film workers. Zack Snyder, very over the top, a lot of action, a lot of special effects. He makes movies that are very entertaining on a superficial level, and he's also capable of going a little deeper than that. I've said this before, The Watchmen is one of my favorite movies ever. A lot of people didn't like it. I did. I think that movie is one of the best movies ever made. And then you have Christopher Nolan, who's done a lot of great things as a director, not really as a producer only until now, but I like pretty much all of Nolan's movies, and yeah, so how do those two things come together in Man of Steel? They definitely tried to come together. They definitely succeeded on some level, but on the whole, I think this movie was a good starting point for the franchise, and I think it'll set the stage for better movies down the road, but I think this one was merely good. So let's talk about the movie. So let's talk about some of the problems I have with it first. First, and this is something that I knew was probably going to happen going in, but nevertheless, it's an origin story. We see origin stories all the time in movies. We've seen it with Spider-Man, we've seen it with Superman, kind of, not as much as we saw it in this one, but we have. We've seen origin stories with Batman, we've seen origin stories with the Green Lantern, sometimes even outside of superheroes. We've seen an origin story with Star Trek 4 years ago. And the problem is, we've seen these things so many times in different formats, video games, movies, comic books, TV. We know what's going to happen. We know Peter Parker gets bit by the radioactive spider. And no matter how much everyone knows that's going to happen, every time we see a new Spider-Man reboot, we have to watch it again. So often when you're talking about an origin story, the first hour is spent just getting things in place, because there are certain things that they have to do. I'll go back to Spider-Man because I think the first Spider-Man movie is a great example of this. Peter Parker has to be raised by his aunt and uncle. His uncle has to die in an accident that Peter can blame himself for. It has to be, he gets bitten by a radioactive spider. I mean, these things have to happen, and 95% of the audience knows it's going to happen, so we just have to watch it. And oftentimes it's a little boring because we know what's going to happen. Maybe there are a couple of changes here and there, but for the most part we know how it's going to play out. So that's very much the case in this movie, in my opinion. They try to overcome this with a lot of special effects, but in my opinion, if you look at the first hour or so of this movie, there is some going through the motions. Now, I will give credit to those special effects because they are tremendous, they are numerous, there are a lot of them, but I don't think that can totally carry any segment of a movie. So, looking at this, I was hoping that we would get something a little more engaging than we did, simply because Christopher Nolan directed a brilliant origin story in Batman Begins. That was a movie that introduced us to Batman in a way that we were familiar with, but still introduced enough new things and displayed things in an interesting way that it was engaging while still being true to the character origin. beyond that, I mean, that was something you kind of have to deal with these origin stories more often than not. Sometimes you get lucky, but a lot of times origin stories, they're tough. Um, this movie is completely humorless. There are 2 or 3 jokes in there that you're meant to laugh at. Very few funny moments, and quite a few of the funny moments are very subdued and not very funny at all. I know Superman's serious business, and I know superheroes are serious business, but have a little fun with your movie, guys. This is a movie about a man in spandex who flies around with a cape. I mean, have a little bit of fun with that. That's one thing I would say. Um, what else? There's a lot of attempts to have dramatic scenes in here. There's a lot of attempts to give the characters weight. There's a lot of attempts to make a really powerful and compelling story. But one, I don't think there's enough time to do that because we spend half the movie getting everything in place. And then you get to the second half of the movie and they don't have time for a full story. So they kind of give us a generic, this guy needs to do this, and, you know, this bad guy's going to do this and we have to stop him. And I'm not going to give away exactly what that is, although it's pretty generic. It's not much of a story. It's just stuff that happens, and then other stuff happens as a reaction to that, and you just kind of watch it. So, knowing what Nolan is capable of with his other superhero franchise, I was hoping for a little bit more. I think that's fair to say. I think there was a lot of effort put into making this movie feel like it really meant something and really feel like it was a big deal, but I think some of that effort did not pan out. Not all of it. Quite a bit of it did work out. I really liked the Kevin Costner as Elder Kent and Diane Lane as Mama Kent. I thought the performances were, for the most part, pretty good. I'm a big fan of Amy Adams. I think she's a fantastic actress. But there were some parts of it that just felt a little empty, like something was missing, that connection. And maybe that's just because Superman is a passive superhero. Well, okay, passive. I mean, when I say that, I mean he's not human. The things he stands for are very simple, very generic, and and he doesn't have a lot, and he does often, at least, doesn't have a lot of emotion behind what he does. He's kind of a very, in some ways, very plain superhero. There's not a ton to him. And maybe for an origin story, because there is the possibility for Superman to become a much more interesting character later on, that's all you can do with him. I had a couple other holes to pick in this movie, little things here and there that bugged me. I thought it was a little jumpy and discombobulated. It kept jumping from one scene to the other, and I didn't think the connections between those scenes was great. I think it could have been better. But I will say, this movie is spectacular to look at. This movie has a lot of really good action scenes. Some of the fight scenes, they're like the Matrix Revolution fight scenes, just better. Like if you remember watching the Matrix Revolutions back in the day and it looked like a cartoon, this kind of goes a step up from that. This advances on that, and I think it's fun. Movie is well made, certainly. I really enjoyed the first 20 minutes because while I knew what was going to happen, it was still very entertaining to look at and get that fresh angle on the way things are. And I think they're going to make a great Superman movie next time. But this one, it's good. It's entertaining. There enough of the emotional scenes work, the drama scenes. It's a functional movie that gets us to where we need to be in order to make a better movie later. But for this one, I'm going to give it a 70 out of 100. So that puts it about in the middle of the summer movies. Not anywhere near as good as Iron Man 3 or Star Trek Into Darkness, but I enjoyed it. I think it's a good time. And that's all I got. My next movie review will be World War Z. It might be next week, but more than likely the week after. So, see you then, and summer keeps chugging along.